Good morning. Let me
Good
switch. Let me
morning.
turn our faces on. Let me switch. Where's the button? I'm so experienced. All right, there we go. Hey, what's up? How's it
Hello,
going?
everyone. Good morning.
Good morning, Artemis. How is it
And
going?
John Cat.
Sean Cat's here as well. My chat is lagging. Tragic. Click refresh chat. There we go. Should be good now. Ah, there we go. Konbanwa.
Konbanwa.
Konbanwa. Are you
Ohayo
in
gozaimasu.
let's see,
It's like
konbanwa.
9 in the morning where I am.
Konbanwa would be, let's see, East Coast maybe of the United States, could also be Europe, but not Asia because Asia would be morning or early morning, and West Coast US or like Hawaii would be still afternoon. So I'm going to guess that it's East Coast. So konbanwa. Harp in the background. Nico is a rock
Uh,
harp player. Yes.
no, Ray is learning the pedal harp um, in her free time, in her very small amount of free time.
Sounds like a good use of time.
Yeah, it's also really pretty sounding, so I enjoy it.
Harp is fun. I played it a bit when I was at your house last.
Yeah.
It didn't pick it
Oh, I didn't pick it up.
up.
Oh, well.
It just looked like you were stroking something.
Well, I got to enjoy the beautiful sound, and no one else did.
Yeah, for sure.
We have a dialogue in phase one that's like I think it's in phase one, or I think it's published because we have a lot of dialogues that students have never seen that are just waiting to see the light of day. But where there's the tour guide that says like the person on the tour is like konnichiwa, but it's morning, so the tour guide says ohayo gozaimasu, and then ohayo gozaimasu, and I thought it was interesting because I don't know when I was a student, teachers I don't know they make it sound like there's all these rules that you're a terrible person if you break, but like a Japanese person also will accidentally say konnichiwa when it's morning and instead of ohayo gozaimasu, and then even if they're supposed to say ohayo gozaimasu.
Yeah.
I was reminded of it with everyone saying all these things.
I think that's a thing that is interesting to note for sure. Like, you'll be walking around and then someone will say konnichiwa to you even though it's like 8 a.m. and you're like, yeah, okay, see, it happens.
Yeah,
Take that, teachers in schools. That's what I feel like. Um, it's just like one of those things wherein there's the way in which things are supposed to be, and then there's the way in which reality actually is and what people actually say and do. And
mm,
yeah, you're supposed to say "ohayou gozaimasu," and it's never wrong really to say it, but a konnichiwa will slip out in the morning for sure. It happens.
I'm reading questions
Yeah,
from Greeny Wisp.
I'm going to paste that one into our document. Um, so that we can get to it. So yes, thank you for bringing that question. I think you asked it in Discord, and I was like, "Hey, ask on this next stream." Um, so yeah, I'm pasting these questions into our document here so we can get to them.
Yeah, that works.
Um, yeah, we will upload to YouTube, and there'll be timestamps for sure. We just uploaded last week's episode today to YouTube, so Rainy Wisp, your question will be answered, and it'll be on YouTube as well as Twitch. But
Yeah, and there's an embarrassing screenshot of me on the thumbnail.
hey man, you gotta have those clicks. You know what I'm saying? I get I get that. An awkward
I
time
guess we can just.
around 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. when you gotta be prepared for anything. Yeah, it's true. It could be because I've definitely heard Ohio gozaimasu even though it's like 12:35 or like 1 p.m. People don't always know the exact time of the day.
Yeah. I had a teacher way back in the day that was like, "It's Ohio gozaimasu until 11 exactly, and then it's konnichiwa." And I was like, "Really?" Like,
Dude,
seems
sh-
pretty intense.
she would have a word with the delivery guy who said "Ohayou gozaimasu" at 2 p.m. to me the
Well,
other
that's another
day.
thing that's interesting is like, so I was sitting at a restaurant with Ray the other day, and I think we were eating lunch. It was like 1 or 2 in the afternoon,
Yeah.
and no, I think we might have been eating dinner even, but it was in the afternoon, and then an employee came into the restaurant and she said "Ohayou gozaimasu" to her coworkers, and it's because like it's the
Yeah.
start of her work
Starting
day
shift
thing.
day.
It's
Yeah.
like, so that's why she says good morning, and then Ray was like, "We should teach that," and I was like, "Yeah, we should teach that,"
Yeah, for sure.
but we haven't yet. But in due time,
Yeah, it makes sense. It really does.
yeah.
What Chie said in chat made me laugh. So if you start saying "Ohayou gozaimasu" at 10:59:58, you'll need to stop halfway, then say the second half of
Yeah.
"Konnichiwa." Oh, Ohanichiwa.
Ohanichiwa.
There's that oha konbannichiwa thing that people say.
Yeah, I've
Like,
never heard someone say that, but
well, if you watch streams of Japanese
oh, maybe
streamers,
that's what I.
game
Yeah, that's
streamers,
probably
like, because like it's all times of the day when they start their stream for all people around the world, right? So
why. Hmm.
so they say, oh, not everyone does it, but there's certain people who do say it. Oha konbannichiwa. When working at a hotel, we said "Ohayou gozaimasu" always because people have weird shift times and this kept it consistent. Yeah, there you go. There it is.
Hmm.
That's what Chia did at the hotel. Um. Yeah. Anyway, how's it been?
It's,
How's your
it
week?
has been swell. Yeah, it's
Did you
good.
say
I've been
swell or did you say well?
swell.
Swell.
Yeah,
What a word.
swell like good.
Swell. I can hardly hear that. Like the S is like. Am I a native
Swell.
speaker? I don't even know.
Yeah, maybe you're a native speaker of Spanish, and I should say as swell to help you catch it.
Hmm, maybe.
Uh, yeah, it's been good. I've been dealing a lot with all these new writers that we're trying to train so that we can produce content faster for both phase 2 and then also just content that will live on NativShark but not be in core studies,
Hmm.
for things like our dictionary once it's released. And yeah, it's a lot of work to train people to write things correctly. And it kind of goes back to this issue we were just talking about with like Ohayou gozaimasu and
Oh yeah.
what's natural to say and what's not. Um, and the reason it's tricky with these writers sometimes is that they cannot write the way that people talk normally.
Mm,
Um, and they say things like, "Well, like because if you're a student, you know, we have things like textbook casual, textbook formal,
yeah.
which is correct language that you probably wouldn't actually say in everyday life because people drop particles, they do all kinds of things. Um, and then writers just always gravitate toward textbook everything, even if we tell them make it natural sounding, they still end up doing it
Right.
inadvertently. And sometimes they like argue with us about it. They say like, "Well, I have to do that because it'll confuse your students if we if I leave out like particles and stuff." And it's like, well, doesn't it confuse our students when they go out in the real world and don't hear people talk like this? Is what I always think.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, so we're working on improving our internal notes that we give to writers so that they can understand that a little
Right.
better. And we have some room for improvement too in our explanations, because the fact that we have to end up having the conversations with the writers over and over again means that our instructions are not as good as they could be, I think.
Right.
So we're
Well,
working on those.
it's also like a mind shift. I mean, as a writer, right?
Yeah,
You're not
yeah,
used to thinking in that. in that way from the get-go. So definitely the instructions have to be even better than you would normally have to make them, because it is such a different, maybe unexpected way to think about it.
Yeah, there's some unlearning to do.
Yeah.
And for that reason, we actually try to avoid writers who have experience with anything regarding Japanese teaching. They just the unlearning is just too much for them in so many cases that we've kind of started to avoid them.
Right. Like okay, so ideska, or like ideska, like this thing you get taught pretty early on in like Genki or whatever. Like, is it okay? Is it
Yeah.
good? The other night I was watching a stream, and I'm probably gonna pronounce it wrong because I can't get the chichetsu right, but he was like iska, like
Oh yeah.
that's okay. Like that's not gonna be taught to you anywhere, And if you're like trying to learn from immersion, like obviously you can figure it out, but in what cases are things dropped and how are they dropped? There are certain patterns that I feel like in traditional education, it's like we pretend these things don't exist, and that's kind of weird, you know?
Yeah. We haven't gotten into the nani desu ka toka, like
Yeah,
yet, because it's kind of like tricky to teach,
right.
because if you do that in the wrong situations, you kind of sound not very good. Like
Yeah. Well, I
it
understand that it's
doesn't sound good
complicated.
if you like say it in certain situations, but it is common, yeah.
Yeah, you hear it. And this is the tricky part, right? You hear it like all the time. Like, literally every day of your life in Japan, you're gonna hear someone talk like that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but the cases in which you can do it and not be an asshole is the part where there's trickiness.
Yeah. Well, the other trickiness. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's an asshole, but like,
Sometimes.
well, I mean, I've read articles in Japanese, for example, saying that some young workers sound less professional than they intend to because they do that. And
Yeah.
then that gets into the issue of sometimes a person to us sounds like they're saying like nani nani, whereas they probably sometimes are thinking they're saying des or mas.
Yeah.
Um, it's just very fast. And
Right.
so then you get into the issue of if you're the writer, what do you write? Do you write it with just the chisaitsins, or do you write des? And then if
Yep.
you write des, then the voice actor is probably going to say it like that. So what if we want the voice actor to say it like where it almost
Mm.
sounds like and not des? So these are the kind of things that we are trying to clarify our standards on internally so that our writers
Mm.
do cover everything the way that it should be covered, and so that our students can get exposed to natural Japanese in all forms.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a struggle.
But yeah, it's fun though. I enjoy it.
Yeah. That one that one specifically is interesting because you're right. Sometimes people are just saying things fast. Um, but sometimes no. It's definitely the chichetsus. But
Yeah, and I see. Go ahead.
there's this whole thing in Japan itself, like for even native speakers, where you go to the like business section in the bookstore, and there's like entire walls of books on how to talk like an adult. 大人
Yeah,
な um what is it, Gengo or whatever, like language of adults.
yeah.
Like it's
Well,
a
they
thing.
also have guides on speaking, super formal stuff.
Yeah.
You get a job in customer service as like a teenager, and yeah, you've heard it your whole life, but you don't necessarily know what is correct to say because a lot of
Right.
the stuff you hear, even from service employees, is not. Um, Anyways, there's one more thing. Like Tyler, I see mentioned
Mm.
that teachers would always lean heavily to speak as formally as possible. I'm not actually talking about formal or casual language. I'm talking about natural or unnatural language. Can you hear that?
Yes.
A baby throwing toys behind me.
I certainly can
Um,
hear that.
Sorry. Uh, I'm talking about in formal and casual language. It's difficult for us to get writers to write things that would be natural to say. Um,
Yeah.
so it covers both formal and casual. And the tricky thing there is you get a teacher and then they tell you that that it's formal. And then what they tell you is casual is also not really if it's unnatural sounding. Um, we're doing this thing now with content where part of the way we've gotten around all these problems with writers is that we have context written for every sentence. So the Japanese writer who writes a sentence in Japanese also has to write the context in which that sentence would appear in Japanese. And because of that, it's a lot easier to give them feedback and say, you gave this context, but like you included this particle in the sentence, but you wouldn't include it in that context. And to the point where these textbook casual and textbook formal sentences, we want to teach them because you do need to know the grammar rules. And, if you're going to take all these standardized tests and things, like they test you on it. So
Right.
it's good to know you want to be an educated individual. But it's really hard for us to write natural context for the textbook sentences. It's just very difficult. We don't want to have every otherwise we get to the point where it's like, well, we could just put, you're writing an essay for your teacher for every single one, but
Yeah.
we don't want to do that either. So
Right.
it's something we're actually working on figuring out. It's like, how do we make the context for these textbook casual formal sentences
Mm.
be natural?
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting challenge because both exist, both casual and formal exist, and there's natural situations in which you would use both. So you can't only teach casual because that's not correct either, and you can't only teach formal and just say, well, you'll learn casual naturally either, because that's also not correct. So you have to figure out how to navigate teaching both essentially.
Yeah.
That's
So I
true.
was never taught casual anything by teachers. Even when they told me they were teaching me casual language, it was not. It was textbook casual.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, we want to teach all of it, like what people actually say.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, in some ways, I'm really glad that we taught Japanese before other languages because
Same. Yeah.
we run into these problems now
Yep.
that we might not have accounted for when building a platform if we had started with something like Spanish or something.
Yeah, for sure. There's just a lot of things in Japanese to think about and consider when you're trying to build a platform to teach it. So it's a good first one.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Anyway, we can get into the doc if you want.
Sure.
Take your pick of things to talk about.
Hmm. All right. This first question. Isn't doing English to Japanese cards useful? I feel like I can't make progress and things don't stick unless I do this. So, this is a question that we have gotten it directly a couple times, but often we just see it kind of written in, online or in our community, where people say things like, "I have to build flashcards for English to Japanese because otherwise I'm not learning."
Oh, yeah, yeah. English to
Yeah,
Japanese.
yeah. And so
Um,
ours are like the default NativShark ones are Japanese to English, so it's Japanese on the front, English on the back. People are saying
yeah,
they want English on the front and Japanese on the back. Um, and we don't do that on purpose. We intentionally don't do
yeah.
that. Um, there's a reason, a couple reasons. So why is that, Nico? You want to get into that? Want to break that down a little bit?
Sure. I can say wholeheartedly that I'm vehemently against English front, Japanese back. And
Yeah.
the first reason for that is that a flashcard is not a quiz. And if you have English on the front, there is no correct answer on the back. It's just,
Yep.
that's not a thing. Flashcards are used to check your comprehension of something. And so you might say you're doing Japanese to English, or even Japanese to Japanese, which I know some people asked about. We're going to talk about later. If you understand the front of your card, you don't even need to read the back. The back of the card just shows you something that can remind you of what the front meant if you had forgotten it. Whereas say you have English on the front and then Japanese on the back, um, there's there's a countless number of answers that you could have for
Yeah.
a certain English phrase to become Japanese. And so we see these students saying that they want to do that because it improves production, but it doesn't
Yep.
improve production, because what you're doing is trying to remember a set phrase that you have not arbitrarily, but just matched to one other phrase, even if there's no reason to have them matched up that way.
Yep. This is specifically an issue with, I mean, it is in other languages too, but specifically with Japanese because there are no translations between Japanese and English. We just everything's like, in general, a translation is an approximation, no matter what you're doing. That's always the case. But in Japanese and English, this pair specifically, the amount of which it is approximation is like tenfold. Um, so either way you're trying to do this, it's the same thing happens. If you were learning English from Japanese, you'd have the same problem, wherein it's like, well, you could say that one thing 50,000 different ways in English that you're doing in Japanese because of the way the two languages pairs work. It's specifically an exaggerated problem to do it this way.
The other reason is that if you want to practice production, using English to Japanese card is utilizing the wrong areas of your brain to
Right.
begin with. If you want to improve your production abilities, you need to try to create sentences, not remember them.
Correct.
So you would have to either. This is why so many polyglots and everyone else talks about how important it is to just speak, like get speaking practice if you want to learn a language, because you put yourself in a certain context and then you suddenly need to create a sentence
Yep.
in the language you're learning. And having a conversation is the most natural way to do this because it's how we evolved, and humans are really good at that. There are artificial ways you can do that, like you can, write a journal. You can create situations in which you might want to say things and imagine what you would say. The reason that in a conversation it is a little different is that you don't have time to think very much about what you
Yep.
want to say. Um, but this skill of having an idea of what you want to say and then figuring out how to say it is not done with an English to Japanese flashcard.
Yeah, it gets back to the kind of the conversation we had last week a little bit with the difference between happy flashcards and sad flashcards. And like creating English to Japanese, or source language or target language flashcards are the sad kind of flashcards because they're like slippery slope too. Like they feel like this is good, this is going to be effective, this is going to help me, I'm learning better by doing this, when you're actually not even training the correct part of your brain for the thing that you want to be training them for. So there's essentially, you're spending all this time doing something that doesn't actually really provide any benefit. It's negligible. It feels like benefit because you're able to remember that specific phrase, but it doesn't help the broad contexts in which that thing might be used. And in fact, it can make it worse because you're specific. Now your brain thinks that this one phrase or one word means this one phrase and this one word when it really doesn't. Like we were getting back to with the way that translations are great approximations. So you're telling your brain that it does mean this thing when it doesn't. So then when you do find it in another context, you end up being really thrown off. Like, wait, what? I didn't know. I didn't think. And then you're like have this deep-seated thing where you thought it was this one way, but it really isn't. And then you have a hard time undoing that because you spent all this time going English to Japanese or whatever. So I understand why it feels like a good idea. I one time as well thought about doing that. Started making flashcards that way, and then I kind of stopped and investigated it a lot more, and did a lot of learning and reading. Even in like, I in one of the linguistics classes in university, we were talking about language acquisition. We talked about this specifically, and yeah, it doesn't help with acquisition. So there you go. That's why we don't do it.
Yeah. One other reason is that it's slow, and flashcards are meant to be fast.
Yeah, well, that's the happy sad flashcards. Like happy flashcards are the ones that go really, really quickly because they should. They're ephemeral. Flashcards are a snapshot of what you're currently working on, get into your brain to comprehend. They're not meant to be lifelong things hanging on to you for the rest of, like little leeches.
Yeah, and because they take about 10 times longer than doing front side target language, like Japanese on the front, and then
Yeah.
English on the back, you just get through less of the language by doing that. So back in the day when I used to learn with flashcards, which we've gotten away from, thankfully, but was my only option back in the day, say my friend is doing English to Japanese and they're making their own flashcards the same way I was making mine. If I'm going 10 times faster because I'm only doing Japanese to English, I'm getting exposed to 10 times more Japanese than them.
Yeah.
So if they're doing, 3 cards a day and I'm doing 30, a year from now, who has learned thousands of words and who hasn't?
Yep.
So that's the other issue, is that it's just slow. And I think it's fine to do things that are slow, but they should not be flashcards.
If you're gonna do something that's really slow, it should
Yeah.
be doing something like breaking down a native material that you really like a manga or something,
Or writing
or
something or trying to
yes.
speak. Yeah.
So yeah, or like trying to have a conversation, like get in a call with somebody who speaks Japanese. Try to take a lesson. If you're working on production specifically, I switched to thinking about reading. But the other thing that you can do to work on production, and which Nico kind of said it earlier, but you can basically take a word or a phrase, and you can think about how might I say this? How might I make up a situation in your mind, or take the context. Like NativShark is going to have context soon. um, take one of the contexts of the sentence and just think in your mind mentally. Oh, thanks for following, Josh39. Josh39. Thanks for following.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, we're talking about why we don't have flashcards going from the source language to target language in NativShark. But okay, so what you can do to work on production, right? Because this is a question people ask. What can I do to work on production then if I shouldn't make flashcards that go like this? Okay, here's the answer for now. So take a given context for a word, and then think about how you might make a sentence using that word in that context. So let's do an example. Like, oh, no, I can't think of an example. Okay. All right, I got one. All right, Nico, you and I are at we're at an izakaya because that's what we do sometimes. And I want to use the word oishi. Very easy here. But I don't want to say just oishi. So like make a sentence in your head that's using the word oishi in the context of an izakaya that's not just saying oishi once. Like we could be eating food.
Actually asking.
Yeah, I'm actually asking. I'm actually asking you right now. Like just do something. For using the word.
Oishine.
Okay, there. It wasn't just the word oishi, and it was oishine. So the context was like we're eating something at izakaya, and then he had it, and he's like, oh, oishine. Like that works. Okay, we produced something. Or kore oishi. Like those are the kind of things. Very simple, very very simplistic example.
Yeah.
But that's production.
I usually don't do it with words, although that's one way to do it. I just think of situations.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean you can do it that way too.
You go to a coffee shop and you're gonna order something. What are you gonna say? Like you were just introduced to a friend of a friend. Now what? What do you say to them?
Yep.
You're lost at the station and you're calling your friend and trying to explain where you are. What do you say to them? Basically, you experience countless situations every day as it is. Just imagine if everyone around you could only speak Japanese, what would you say?
Right. And the point
Try to figure it out.
the point I'm trying to make here is the act of thinking about your answer, whether or not you come up with something that's correct or not correct, it doesn't matter. It's the act of using your knowledge in the target language to try to build something. That's what builds production skill. It's the it doesn't even matter if it's right or wrong. it's the attempt at trying something that triggers those parts of your brain. It uses the parts of the mind that are working on, can you produce something in this language. So that's a way to practice production. We will build tools like this into the platform eventually, but for now, you can do that mentally. So yeah, there's the flashcard question.
Yeah,
Danshi
what else we got?
kudasai. Wait, latteを
Latte,
ください. Latte.
latte.
There you go. Yeah, see, perfect. You were like, you're at the coffee. What are you gonna at the coffee shop? What are you gonna do? There you go. Production. Um. All right. Next question is,
Latte.
okay. Are language paths still going to shift to the target language? Japanese lessons in Japanese. If so, is that the reason there's no plan to have JP for advanced content at least? If not, why is there no plan?
There is a plan.
Yep, there is a plan.
So yeah, phase 4, and we haven't decided exactly when it happens,
Yeah.
but there will be more Japanese content at some point when it is natural and not likely to slow down the progress of students. It will be integrated, and we have to decide internally still how we're gonna do it, but it's worth noting that Japanese content exists already. Like we
Yep.
have writers write context for a sentence. They write it in their native language, which is Japanese first. So, before this meeting, I was going through dozens and dozens of Japanese sentences with the context of them written in Japanese. So maybe those will get exposed to a student at some point too, or be toggleable or something. Our dictionary will also have Japanese entries and things like that. I think the dangerous part of doing Japanese stuff is doing it too early. And I made this mistake myself as a student, because you go read a blog post about how if you really want to learn Japanese words, you got to make Japanese flashcards where you have the Japanese on the front and then the definition on the back. And I was even doing the tree building, where if the definition has a word you don't know, then you go make a flashcard for that word, and then the
Yep.
explanation is on the definition in Japanese. I did thousands of those. And I spoke like a dictionary after I was done, and it was really weird.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oof.
but aside from slowing you down a lot, it makes you bad at translation, and a lot of times you end up not understanding the word that you've supposedly learned because you didn't understand the Japanese definition all that well, because the
Yeah.
Japanese definition assumes that you're a native speaker of Japanese and that you understand the nuance of the words in the definition. And Japanese definitions are often kind of vague sounding
This
to
is
begin with. They're
especially
like
true
pretty
with
bare bones.
Japanese dictionary entries. Like, read dictionary entries in your own language and make sure that's a dictionary that's not targeted towards learners. And you will see that the definitions, if you think about it, a lot of these definitions assume that you already know the context of the language, because you do. You're the native speaker of this language. So you're reading the dictionary, like I don't know, you're Merriam-Webster's, but not the learner's one, but the Merriam-Webster's English dictionary, and it's like, oh, I know all these definitions, sure, but now I really think about it, and there you will find cases where it's like, this wouldn't make sense if I didn't already know English. That's what happens in Japanese. If you're reading a Japanese dictionary, like your ability to remember can plummet, and not only that, you probably will learn something wrong, essentially. um, I think I can specifically talk about Ty here. I'm sure he doesn't mind. He just
I see him
commented in
commenting.
chat, which, like, he did this as well. And then he did it for a while, and I remember he came over. I think it was when he came over the first time to Japan to my house, and we were talking about stuff, and there were like two words that were pretty common words that he was just like, wait, what? That means what? Because I think it was Chie was using it, and I was like, yeah, that's what this means. And he's like, oh, I didn't know. And he's like, I think that was one of the cards that I learned early on when I was doing Japanese to Japanese. And I was like, oh, probably was. He goes and looks in his flashcards. Sure enough, okay, Ty says a lot more than two. Okay, I was being gracious. There were quite a few words that were pretty common words, and it came because when he was first doing his studies, he did a lot of Japanese, and then he kept it up for a while. And it just like it's true, it can happen. Not all the words, but sometimes it can happen where you legitimately just missed something completely because yeah, it slowed you down. The other
Yeah.
reason why here's the biggest one is um, you're already native level in a language. There's actually no reason not to leverage that language when learning the second language. Like, um, this is the reason why adults can learn languages so much faster than children can. You know, it takes like a child like 7 years, 8 years to become decent at a language. Like, they can talk, sure, when they're 3, but they're not very good at it, until like 7 or 8 or so. That's a really long time. Adults can learn languages in like 2 to 4 years to a very high level, right? And that's because if you leverage your current language for the target language, you could be significantly more successful at the speed and the comprehension and acquisition. And you can jump in like right at an adult level in that target language. You don't have to go through all of the development processes as a child because you've already done all that. Your brain is already capable and already has formed all the pathways. You just have to learn how to transition those pathways to, um, you know, the target language. Also, thank you for follow. I saw it. Senetili. I don't know how to read names. I'm sorry, but thank you for the follow. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think another reason that
Hamburger or hot dog?
the Japanese approach
Hamburger.
gained a lot of popularity is that English Japanese dictionaries are confusing. They're
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah, definitely agree.
um, and if you're looking up, especially going from English to Japanese or Japanese to, I don't know which one of the directions is especially bad, but I think that's another reason it causes problems. And then I saw in Tyler's comment, he said that's a really interesting perspective on using JJ cards and about the cards even. So I mentioned that I did Japanese to Japanese flashcards for a few years. I quit doing flashcards for Japanese maybe 4 years ago. When I quit, I had something like 25,000 cards, mature cards, 20,000 mature cards. I don't know. It was a lot. But I started doing Japanese to Japanese maybe after about 10,000 cards, and I only did it for maybe 5,000 words or something. And then I realized it was just making my Japanese worse. So I stopped doing that. And then I went back to doing English to
No, no,
Japanese to
Japanese
English
English.
for a
Yeah,
while.
yeah,
And then actually, I just stopped doing the back of the cards.
yep,
So the last maybe 5,000 6,000 flashcards I ever had was just Japanese front, nothing on the back. And then if I didn't remember something, I would just go look it up. But usually it was just a reminder that it was a word that I had learned. And it gets easy once you're at that level. It's not that hard to learn a new word, or to just check if you forgot it, or
yep,
the sentence reminds you of what it meant, just because the sentence is context for the word. Um, so yeah, you just don't get a lot extra out of doing the Japanese stuff, but there is value in consuming Japanese content, and that's why there's
yeah, yeah. That's what I was gonna
the
say to
question. The
summarize
question
this.
had was about having lessons, e.g., lessons in Japanese, and you should read things in Japanese when you're
Yep,
at the level that you are able to do so. But that doesn't mean that you should have your lesson be in Japanese if it's going to be harder for you to understand the concept being taught. Like say you have a sentence in Japanese that we're teaching you on NativShark. Why wouldn't you want to see how a professional translator would translate it into natural language while you also have the word by word breakdown beneath it?
yep,
Like they're a professional translator, like it's pretty useful to see how they might have translated something. And then you can think about how you might have translated it. And sometimes we've had students point out ways to make a translation better, because there are often ways to make them better, regardless of who translated it and how
yep,
experienced they are. Um, so I don't necessarily think it's good to have a Japanese lesson written in Japanese when it's just going to slow you down. Whereas like a lesson should just be to understand the target concept as simply and quickly as possible, so you can get that concept out of the way, and then you can go do stuff in Japanese.
You're right.
You can go read the stuff that you want to read in the first place in Japanese. Go play the games you want to play in Japanese. Go watch the shows you want to watch in
Have the
Japanese.
conversations with the people you want to have.
Yeah,
Right. So that's again the point here is language acquisition and being able to use the language in the ways that you want to use it to reach your goals. Okay. And as a result of that, that's why we work really hard to make sure that the things that are in NativShark are going to get you to that direction. So that's why we don't do things that we don't do and do the things that we do is because like that's our filter, right? We're filtering out like we've said a couple times. There's many ways to do things, but NativShark is a specific filter, and that filter is language acquisition to help you reach your goals. And this is one of those ones. So, but definitely do consume and use you know native Japanese material in your target or whatever your target language is. Do that as early as you can. Meaning, the point at which you have learned enough concepts that you can get through a decent amount of the material without it being an exhausting experience. That's the point at which, and I think most people kind of know what that feels like. If it's completely exhausting to get through one sentence, it's probably not time yet to start working on a book or a movie or something in your target language. You can do it again, but there's no need to do that. You don't have to. You can wait a little bit longer until it doesn't completely exhaust you to get through one sentence. Maybe you get exhausted after 5 sentences, maybe 10 sentences, and then it's time to start
yeah.
going over
The other
new
thing to
material.
keep in mind is that I think all of us as students have a tendency to overestimate our willpower.
I mean, I do
Um,
every single day of my life. I'm like, oh, I can totally do that, easy.
so you
Oh
think
wait,
like, well, I could kind of
no.
read Japanese, so I want my lessons to be in Japanese,
Yeah,
and you read, a lesson in Japanese, and yeah, it takes you 5, 10 times longer than reading it in English, probably 10 times longer. Um, but at the beginning, you're really motivated and you have the time. That's why you wanted to do it in the first place. But are you likely to do that every day for hundreds or thousands of days? And this gets back to basically the core premise of NativShark is to keep our students consistent. And if you make it too much of a hassle, they're not going to be consistent. How do you get exposure? You need a lot of exposure to a language. Like a solution to making it consistent is not study 5 minutes a day, because then you have a student who studies for 20 hours in their first week and they've already studied more than you study in a year if you're doing 5 minutes a day. Um, I didn't do that math actually, but I just, yeah. Uh, so you want to be consistent and you want to get high volumes of exposure to the language consistently. But to do that, the thing that you're doing every day should not feel like it's draining the soul and energy out of your body, which it might feel like that if you try to read lessons in Japanese before you're ready to, and suddenly one lesson is taking you an hour to read. Because a lesson should take you 10 to 15
yeah.
minutes to read.
The biggest thing is
And
there's such minimal benefit to doing so. Like,
yeah, there is huge benefit to reading Japanese in Japanese. Like,
right,
if you
massive.
study what linguists have done, like, you have student A speaks to people all day, every day in the language. Student B reads books in the language all day, every day. After a certain period of time, the person who speaks all the time climaxes, like they top out, they plateau at their comprehension level. The person who keeps reading keeps getting better because they get exposed to a wider variety of language. And you sit down with
Yeah.
them, they might not sound quite as fluent at first, but they don't miss the meaning of things. And this is why I think Ray is better at English than I am at Japanese, even though it seems like I'm better when you see us talking in various situations. Like if I'm speaking in Japanese with friends and she's speaking in English, it might seem that I'm better at Japanese than she is English, but she's read more books in English than I have in Japanese. So she actually knows more English than I know Japanese. And I'm a little bit jealous because of it. I haven't had time to read as much in Japanese.
Yeah, you got to get back
But
on
so
that
yeah,
set.
reading content in Japanese. Well, yeah, I'm reading stuff that our writers are writing for Native Shark. That's plenty of reading for now. Um,
Yeah,
so it is really useful. It's really useful to get exposed to Japanese content that you read in Japanese.
right.
I just no one has even come close to convincing me that the content that you're reading in Japanese should be the lesson teaching you a new concept about
Right.
the language.
That's the point we're making here, is that it's the lesson itself does not need to be in Japanese. That said, in our Phase 4 Plus material, there will likely be content that is Japanese only,
Yeah,
just straight
because
Japanese, because it would be.
it gets to the point where what you're trying to learn has to be in Japanese
Yeah.
in the first place.
Another thing on that, and it's totally understandable, and because the phases don't exist yet, so people don't know what scale. As our students as of yet do not realize at what level of ability and what level of language Phase 4 Plus is. Right? We're still, most people, which is totally understandable, we're mostly using, when thinking about the future of NativShark, people are mostly, I'm assuming, thinking about in context of like other learning tools and things that they've seen, which makes sense because we haven't finished it yet. But the distance at which it goes is very far for Phase 4 Plus. So that's why, like, at that point, it does make a ton of sense that it would be, given our previous conversation, at the point at which you are Phase 4 Plus, it makes sense that it would be in Japanese. That's what I'm getting at. Because of how far the content goes.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to become a nurse in Japan, you should probably be able to read, the forms that you give to a patient, for
Yeah.
example. So yeah, it's going to be in Japanese. Oh, thanks for this is a Ray's mug actually,
Cinder
and
said she loves Nico's
I'm
mug.
actually abroad because I have iced Earl Grey tea in here, and it looks like I'm drinking a hot beverage, but it's cold.
I see. I'm drinking water out of my plain mug. Yes.
Actually, I think Ray's mom might have given us this mug. She gave us like all of our dishes.
I too basically only drink out of mugs. It's a superior way to drink things, I think. I even drink
What's
my
classic?
beers out of mugs sometimes. Just pour my beers in mugs.
Yeah, I have big heavy beer mugs for that.
Let's see. What else? We got some more questions. I wish, like, okay, next time we need to get it so that this on stream we're showing the question that we're talking about. I gotta figure that out. I'm gonna ask like Ty or Chie to put something together so that we can just like easily put in the question, so people can see when people come in and out and stuff. So
Yeah, and so someone who just joined us knows they know what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
While we ramble on.
While we
at
ramble
length.
on forever. But we've got professional people like Chie to cut our podcast into little highlights for everyone else someday. So we can ramble as much as we want. +1 for questions on screen. Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll hopefully get that for next episode. If Ty is watching, I think he is. Could you like make a note somewhere that we want to do that? Cool. All right. Next question that we had was this one from Amnistar. I don't know if Amnistar is here today or not, but if not, he'll have to catch the VOD. All right. So he asked if we could write something. I said maybe we could write something, but we're just gonna talk about it, and then maybe someday we'll write about it. I don't know. Things are a bit busy for us right now.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll write about it eventually.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sorry we're not writing about it, but we'll talk about it for you. Okay. He asks, would it be possible for Niko and Caleb to do a write-up on how you think we should approach kanji based on your own experiences? You talked a lot about how memorizing meanings and pronunciations of kanji is the perceived correct way to learn, but disagree with the perception. With that in mind, what should someone new to Japanese be doing with kanji, especially the kanji cards that are presented in the NativShark review sessions? Should I just archive them and learn the kanji through the sample sentences? To quickly answer the last question, no, you don't need to just full archive them. There you go. You don't need a full archive. But it's a good question. It is a good question, especially based off our conversation last week. So let's see. Talked about how memorizing meanings and pronunciation of kanji is the perceived correct way to learn, but disagree with the perception. Okay. So people do perceive learning onyami kunyomi as the correct way to learn kanji. That 100% we both full send disagree with. um, because it takes a lot of time for very minimal. Again, it gets back to one of those things where it seems the right thing to do, but it takes so much time for very minimal benefit. Um, so the correct what we feel like the correct way to do it is to learn readings of kanji through vocabulary, uh, through both flashcards that are exposed to you and also through lessons and also through your exposure to the language, whether that be in a video game or a book or a TV show or conversation. Learning the readings of kanji through that method is the one that we would recommend, which is why flashcards don't our kanji flashcards don't like specifically call out the reading. They do have them on there in the information section, like if you click the I, but they're hidden on purpose, because yeah. Well, there you go. I'll let Niko say some things.
Yeah, it's difficult to explain how one should ideally go about learning kanji because there's just so much room
Well, he
for
did say
misinterpretation,
on
and
our
I
on our own
don't
experiences, so filtered through
yeah,
your own experiences.
and I don't think we've explained it as well as we could yet. Um, I guess I'll just talk about my own experience first. I did RTK and I learned all the Joyo kanji at least, so 2200 or whatever. I made mnemonics. I wrote the stories. I wrote the stories. I didn't even use other people's usually. Um, and I went and learned a bunch of vocab. I tried to learn vocab for the onyomi and kunyomi reading of each kanji right after I learned that kanji. As I mentioned earlier, I did tons of flashcards. It didn't take me very long to realize I didn't remember any of my mnemonics. And the kanji cards just felt like a waste of time. I wasn't brave enough to archive them or delete them because I felt I was really scared of kanji as a student. And I was kind of obsessed with it, like a lot of our students are. So it took me a couple of years to actually just have the courage to delete those cards because they were a waste of time. I got no value out of my kanji cards other than the comfort they gave me knowing that I had done them. But I learned those kanji through words that I had experienced in the real world. And I mentioned that I made flashcards for onyomi kunyomi readings for each kanji I'd learned. As a result of that, I ended up learning a lot of words that aren't very useful and that are pretty obscure at an oddly early time in my studies, which is Caleb mentioned that we hide the example sentences up in the little I section. Part of the reason for that is so that you don't end up being like me, where you're a phase 1 student studying phase 4 words because you're obsessed with learning both readings of a kanji as soon as possible. And I think what it comes down to is if you could magically flip a switch in your brain that would make you not worried about kanji, then you could just worry about learning Japanese. Learn the words, the way people talk and write things. And people happen to write things with kanji in them. And then based on that, you will become able to learn kanji because it'll enter your sight vocabulary in time. That said, it's pretty fun to be able to build up words by knowing what an individual kanji means. And for that purpose, it's kind of nice to have an English representation for individual kanji until you have the words that tell you what it means. That's why we do have cards for kanji, and it's not harmful to learn them, and you don't have to go archiving all of them.
Right.
But I think it's good to keep in mind that if you forget a mnemonic or an English representation of a kanji, it's not really a big deal.
Yeah.
If you remember one and it helps you to decipher the meaning of a word the first time you see it, or it helps you to remember a word that you almost forgot because you remembered what one of the kanji meant, or if you're able to guess what the reading of a kanji is the reading of a word is because you've seen that kanji with that reading in other words, these are all instances in which knowing kanji is really great, and you can be thankful that you learned them in isolation or not. But if you forgot, the meaning of a kanji here and there, it's not a big deal. It doesn't really matter.
Right. The biggest thing I think to keep in mind about, and this is probably something that we need to more specifically say in the platform, but what is the point? What is the goal of learning, of not necessarily learning, but going through kanji in isolation like that? What is the purpose? And it is to create essentially a helper tool for you to acquire the language through vocabulary and things like that through native exposure. That's the point. So the point is not to perfectly recall all kanji in isolation by themselves with an English representation. Like, you don't need to drill that. It probably feels like that's the point, and that's why we should probably work on the communication around it better in the platform. But the point is, it builds a helper tool essentially, like Niko just described it a moment ago. That's what it does.
Yeah, it's a placeholder.
Yes.
So
The whole concept of kanji in isolation with an English representation is just a placeholder. It's not a thing that you need for fluency in the language. Like having a vocab that you can read and understand, that is required for fluency in the language. Being able to understand kanji in isolation is not required. So what to do with our current cards? Because they are a useful placeholder helper. I would go through them clicking the one. I would, like Nico said, I would not worry about if I couldn't remember one perfectly. And then two, I would probably click like the meh face and the smile face, and just never click the forgotten face on all of them, pretty much. And then I would start archiving them at the point at which I felt they didn't need them anymore. Like Nico was saying, at a certain point, they're not beneficial to you. Like, the cards will auto archive actually. All of our flash guides do auto archive eventually. But you might feel like you want to archive them before they hit the auto archive point, and that's fine.
yeah. Also, learning kanji should be fun.
Yeah.
And it should make Japanese more exciting and enjoyable. And if it feels like a stressful, exhausting experience, then I think that's probably a red flag as a student.
Right.
That perhaps you're going about kanji the
Right.
wrong
Like,
way.
like if there's something that you're gonna put willpower into in your studies, that shouldn't be the one that you put it into, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like learning like Latin roots, for example, if you're studying English as
Yeah,
a
it's a good
student.
analogy.
It's really helpful and it's a lot of fun to learn the Latin, to see a word and be able to guess what it means because you know the Latin root of that word.
Yeah.
Do you have to know the Latin root of every single word in isolation? Like be able to say this prefix means this? No, but you know, it's pretty fun to do. And if you learn enough words, you will learn the Latin roots even if you don't know what they mean. Like I think most native speakers would know that like spec is something to do with sight, you know, like introspective or retrospective or
Yeah.
that spect,
Spectacular.
you know. I hope that's Latin and not some other like
I'm
French or
pretty
something. I
sure
don't
it
know.
is. Well, if
Yeah,
it's French, then it would be Latin.
likely, yeah.
Um,
Greek, ancient Greek or something. But yeah,
yeah. Um, I'm actually checking because I kind of want to know.
I knew you'd check.
Of course. Well, you know what? I'm not on Google, and Bing doesn't give me the roots, so guess we don't know.
It's a mystery.
It will always be a mystery.
No, one of
Yep.
our
Okay, I
students has
found
said
it.
something. I forget.
It's Latin. Yeah, you were right.
Yay!
It comes from French as well, so you were right there. Um, yeah, to look. The Latin for word for to look is spectacallum. There you go.
Yeah, we got a new question or suggestion, I should say. Since I think we're out of them in our doc, but
No,
looks
we
like
have
Tyler
like
just did.
two more.
Oh, we do have one more or
What?
two more.
Wait. Maybe just one
One
more.
more. Yeah, but before that, let's keep talking about language stuff.
Yeah, I hope that we got the we answered Amnestar's question satisfactorily enough. See, he wasn't here, we can't know for sure, but
Well, if he has follow-up questions, we can keep answering
Yeah,
them
we'll
after
keep
we've done
answering,
that
sure.
100 times. Maybe we'll be ready to write
To write
that
an article. That's
article
kind of what I'm
about
thinking. Is like after
kanji.
we talk about this enough, then we'll really know what we want to write about. That's um, kind of what I'm thinking. Um, okay, you said something though that made me want to
Did I?
say something about that when you were talking about. I mean, it was like the Latin analogy with. Hmm, yeah, it's. Oh, here it was. I think maybe this is the thing. I was thinking like maybe you and I are possibly um, because it was a while ago, we're forgetting some of the worries that students have with kanji. And I think one of them is that students are worried that they're literally not going to be able to like comprehend the strokes on the screen itself.
Oh yeah,
And so they're worried, so they feel that, well, if I go through all of them in isolation, that's going to train the strokes into my brain. That's the thing that's going to make me memorize the strokes and how the kanji looks, and that's going to be the thing that gives me that recognition of that kanji. But wherein I think we're forgetting that, because the way that, like, I'm assuming that you do it, because the way that I do it now is like I don't know, like I know what the word is based on the context of the word and the sentence that is in. Like I know what the kanji is
yeah.
going to be. I
It's
know how it's going to be read, and I know what the kanji means or whatever because of where it's put. So that's not
yeah. Well,
necessarily,
it's sight vocab. So
yeah, sight vocab.
yeah.
But it
I
wasn't
do not look
drilling
at the
kanji on.
strokes of kanji
Yeah,
ever.
yeah.
Like
There you go.
the only time I think about the strokes of kanji is when I'm handwriting my address on an envelope or a form. Um, that's about it. And you don't, even if like the text is too small to read, like on a small screen or on a sign far away, you can still read kanji by knowing the context of what is being written and knowing the word in which the kanji is appearing. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about strokes and stuff. I mean, if you want to take up calligraphy as a hobby, then
Yeah.
worry about strokes for that purpose. But you don't need to break down strokes when you're reading stuff.
Well, I just mean to say that I think people are worried about their abilities to even just comprehend or recognize a kanji if they don't drill in isolation a million times.
Yeah, like I said, it's students get very worried about kanji, and I was the same.
Yeah.
And
I don't know how to say it other than that. It's like it's not it's not a scary thing. It just becomes normal. I don't know. I don't know what to say. Like even if I see kanji that I don't know, it's not a worry anymore, and I don't really know how to like quantify that or like help someone who's on the other side of that get to this side, but it's yeah, it just feels normal to see even new kanji that I don't know. It just seems normal to see them and read like, oh, here it is. Okay, now it's good. I'll look it up. Maybe I'll
yeah,
forget it the
like
second time, but
the other day, Ray and I were walking somewhere in Tokyo, and there was a sign outside of an izakaya that said "Ishokeme eigyochu," something like that. So like "Ishokeme" is like with all of our might or like working very
yeah.
hard type meaning. So yoji go, and then "Eigyochu" means open. They're doing business right now, and it was handwritten on the sign in like really weird handwriting, and Ray was like, "How I'm surprised you could read that because of how it was handwritten." And I was like, "Well, I mean, it's a sign saying that they're Egyoju, and like I don't need to be able to look at like each individual kanji in Ishokeme because I know that word. I know what that when those four kanji appear together, that's what the word is."
Yeah.
So yeah, the handwriting was really hard to read, but because I knew it was a sign saying that they're open, and because I always saw those four kanji together in that word, like I've seen it hundreds of times, I was able to read it.
Yeah,
So that happens too.
for sure. All right. So Tyler says, um, let's see. I learned kanji with one Kani, and it would be cool to see NativShark roll out a tiny segment in each lesson where you're required to type a little in Japanese. Typing out the words really helped solidify my onyami and kunyami knowledge. Kunyami and onyami, sorry. Kunyami and onyami knowledge. Um,
Typing.
all right. So I get what you're saying. However, in a core, there's it's a design choice that in
Yeah,
any core exercise. So this is something that's in the today's studies part. So this is separate from like extra credit. So in today's studies, there will never be a thing where you have to type or put in an input. Um, that's one of the design
yeah.
choices of NativShark.
But a tool where you type stuff would be cool. I
Yeah,
agree because
for sure,
typing is fun
and
and
it's
it's a
good
good skill
and
to
it's
have.
useful. So yeah, a tool, cool
This go-
for sure,
yeah, this
but
goes
not
back
in
to
core
the issue
studies.
of what I sometimes refer to as friction, um, which the main reason people don't learn Japanese is that they stop learning Japanese. So if your core studies are a hassle, you're less likely to complete them every single day over a long period of time. So, what's defined as a hassle? Well, you'll notice that in core studies, we never have content that is only audio, for example. It's theoretically possible to go through all of phase one without ever turning on your speakers. Yeah, your listening wouldn't get very good,
Yeah.
but it is possible. And that's very intentional because sometimes if you're sitting in the waiting room at the dentist or something and you don't have your headphones and the core studies prevent you from studying unless you can listen to what's being said, then maybe that was the only time during that day that you were likely to study. And then maybe that breaks your streak. And then maybe you don't study the next day. And typing is a similar thing. If I only have one free hand, for example, while I'm reading something on my phone, it's kind of a hassle to type it. So it's less likely that I'm going to complete that unit that day if I have to type in some situations. So we do try to reduce friction as much as possible in course studies because, yeah, we're obsessed with the quality of the content and the lessons and everything else. But at the end of the day, it's less important than you showing up every day as a student.
Yep.
You could study with a wide variety of resources that are not good, but if you did it every day over a long period of time, eventually you would learn the language. If you study with the best method there is, but that method is a hassle and it's only possible to do it when you're sitting at a desk in one place doing one thing, then it's just difficult logistically to make it happen every day. So we try to reduce friction in course studies.
Right.
However, I do think it's fun to type stuff in Japanese. So we do want tools where you can do that. I agree. That'd be fun. It just wouldn't be course studies. It'd be something you could do after finishing your course studies for a day.
For sure. Chie says in here that she says, I'm Japanese and I used to also be scared of learning kanji, but then talking with Caleb and Niko when I met them, they just encouraged me to expose myself, so I kept reading books and just looked up words I couldn't read as they came up, and now I just recognize them from words that I frequently saw in reading things. Which is a point as well that like there's Japanese people that exist that are also have reservations about kanji and think that they're challenging or hard or impressive, and it's the same thing. It applies. It's like just read, just keep getting exposed, and there you go. It works.
Yeah. Like I still learn new kanji, but I don't have flashcards at all anymore.
Yeah, I
But I learn
don't
kanji just
know.
because there are certain words and names that I see them in over and over again, so I just learn them.
I want to say I don't know anyone that I've ever met who doesn't learn new kanji every now and again. Like doesn't
Oh
matter,
yeah,
like it could be
Japanese people
my
also.
my uncle, Japanese uncle, right? And he'll run into kanji that he doesn't know. It happens. We were at like some castle or something, like on a family get together, and he was all like with his glasses, like looking at a kanji, being like, what is that one?" you know, like, and then they figured it out. They like then my mother-in-law came over there. They're both looking at it, and then like, oh yeah, okay, it's this one. It just was an old form of it that like they just kind of had to think about for a while until they figured it out. But like it's a thing. It's it happens. No one was worried. Let's see. Cinder says I've noticed that a bit with reading kanji. People write in Twitch chat, being able to understand what the word is, even if the kanji is hard to make out. That was when we were talking about how like the way to have sight vocabulary with kanji is that when you see the word in context, it's just like, oh, it makes sense. It's like a lot easier to understand what the word is. Reducing
Is
hassle is very
this
important.
one this one last thing about what Tyler wrote, because he said typing out the words really helps solidify my kunyomi and onyomi knowledge. This is another thing that when I was a beginner, I was really worried about knowing both onyomi kunyomi. And I'm not going to say that it's not useful to know them, but it's not something to concern yourself with when you're a low level student, I don't think. And low level being phase 1, 2, 3, I think. Like you learn words, and by learning words, you do learn onyomi and kunyomi when they're common or natural to learn. But knowing if something is onyomi or kunyomi, for example, becomes useful at a pretty high level of the language, because then it gets to the point where you see two kanji that you know in a word, and you can guess the reading of that word based on onyomi kunyomi. Because normally, like for example, a word won't have a mixture of the two. It's possible sometimes they do have ones where it's one onyomi reading of a kanji and one kunyomi reading together in a single word, but usually it's not like that. So you can start to guess the readings of words based on knowing if it's onyomi kunyomi. But that's not something to worry about
For a very
early
long
on. This is
time.
something I didn't start worrying about until even like a couple of years ago. Um, so that's another thing, is just this obsession with kunyomi and onyomi is, I can guess the reasons for it, and I used to be really concerned about it, but I would like students not to be. And this isn't actually in the platform yet, but you'll find that in the future, our kanji cards, when you click on the little eye, they don't just have onyomi kunyomi examples, but they also have examples of readings for proper nouns and irregular readings of that kanji. Um, because those are sometimes more common
Then
or
onyomi
equally
kunyomi.
common as the onyomi kunyomi. And sometimes the onyomi kunyomi are like totally useless. One or the other is totally useless.
Right.
I know this because when I was a beginner, I was obsessed with them, and I ended up learning a bunch of totally useless words because
Yeah.
I learned an example of onyomi and kunyomi for each kanji. But I
That's
didn't learn the irregular words that are really common. I didn't learn the names and places that are really common in many cases.
certainly.
So,
Yeah.
like, if I could just have students not worry about kanji anything, that would be amazing. And I think that's the real challenge when it comes to teaching kanji, is that if you're thinking about, oh, I got to study kanji, I got to learn kanji, then I think that should make you a little bit concerned if you're spending your time in the right way.
Yeah. That's
You
definitely our
should,
biggest challenge. Like our work is cut out
yeah,
for the platform, and how do we make it in a way? How do we phrase things? How do we make design things so that students aren't concerned about kanji? They're not concerned about, working on onyomi kunyomi. They're not concerned about, do I know this kanji in isolation with an English meaning? Do I know all the stroke order? All the things that people worry about or think about when I need to learn kanji. And we've talked about how there's certain benefits to that, but the detrimental part of it, which is the time commitment it takes and the amount of effort it puts into with minimal gains, that's the concern here, and overweighs it, just overpowers it, right? It's like Niko said, you could spend all this time learning onyomi and kunyomi for every kanji, or you could spend that same amount of time progressing in the language. And I say that because learning onyomi and kunyomi is not progressing in the language. It's not progressing your ability to use it, or your, like, these kinds of things. It's just spending a bunch of time like on a side quest, and you don't need to, right? Like you can, but there's no reason to do so. Because like, okay, for example, I actually never did study onyomi and kunyomi at any point. I've never spent time on it. But at a certain point, I don't know how, but like I generally know which one is the onyomi and which is the kunyomi, just because of the way that the words are put together. It's just a thing that you kind of figure out. Um,
yeah. I think someone listening to this or watching this, it sounds like we're all anti-kanji studying, but I think the takeaway is that you cannot not learn kanji.
That's the point. Yeah.
If you learn Japanese, you will know kanji.
Yep.
You will also learn the readings if you learn words, and you will learn to distinguish between the readings if you learn words. It's just a
Yeah.
product of learning the
I think what
language.
we're trying to say is we don't like how there's this way in which learning Japanese often segments out learning kanji as if it's its own separate thing that's not attached to the rest of the language. What our approach is and what we're saying is that it is not. It's like it's the same thing. Learning Japanese, you will also, as a result, know kanji, because it's just wrapped up in learning Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do worry that like we maybe sound way too anti kanji, anti all these things. Like
Yeah, we're not.
we
I
just
think
come
learning
on here
kanji
and
is a lot of
rant.
fun, and I think it should be fun and enjoyable.
We're just about like getting students to reach their goals, being efficient, um, not falling into a bunch of unnecessary traps that just exist everywhere.
Yeah, I don't want students to waste their time. I wasted so much time learning Japanese,
Yep.
and that was like the main reason I started this website years and years ago is that I was like, why did I waste so much time learning Japanese? I need to
Yeah.
help people not waste so much time.
Dude, it's kind of amazing how much information there is on the internet that's not very useful around learning Japanese. Like it's almost impressive. You look at other languages,
Harmful. Like
it doesn't.
harmful.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even say not useful.
harmful. It doesn't exist so much in other languages. Like I don't know what it is specifically with Japanese, but there is like a dearth of so much information on the internet about learning Japanese that is legitimately harmful to your studies. Like you're not
Yeah.
going to learn if you do and follow all these things. Like
Yeah, but it goes back to how we were
it's
saying we were
crazy.
glad that we taught Japanese before we ever
Right.
tried to do other languages
Right.
because we had to get very clear on what we think is a quality educational
Right,
resource.
because here's the big thing. Like Nico and I can sit here and say that there's harmful materials all day long, but if we're not providing a solution or we're not providing what we think is the answer to that, then it doesn't mean anything. And um, that's why it's so important that we're like um, taking the time with Japanese, right? Doing it first, because yeah, we are going to give a solution essentially. But I'm just gonna sit here and say that it sucks without providing why it
Yeah.
sucks and then also a solution for it.
Yeah, and there's so much more that we want to do with NativShark. We just need a bigger team and a little bit of time.
Yeah, so make
Which
sure you
goes full
subscribe.
circle, which goes full circle to the other thing we wanted to talk about, which is why did we get rid of the light
Ah,
plan? Which
yes,
was a question we got from many students.
right. Um, yeah, okay, so yeah, right. So we've seen this question a couple times. I don't know if it's a lot of times, but we have seen it a couple times. Which is yeah, why did we get rid of the light plan?
Or all plans really.
Well, all plans, I
But
guess. Yeah, but specifically the light plan. Well, the biggest reason is the plan was not sustainable for the business. Honestly, it was something we wanted to test, um, and having segmented pricing wasn't working for the business. Meaning, like revenue recouped from subscriptions wasn't enough to sustain continuing to work on the business. So if we wanted to keep working on the business, we wanted to make the this platform for all of you, we couldn't do it with the pricing structure as it was. Another reason is developmentally, both coming up with new features and programming those features, there was a lot of overhead weight by having a tiered pricing system that caused further time, further consideration, more delays. It made development messy, um, and that was an extra cost. Right, you got to think about things like that. Time spent, like in a business, right, when you're working on things, any time spent is essentially money spent. So you have to think about that a lot when you're balancing what actions are you going to take? How are you going to do your development process? How are you going to do your conceptualization, your strategy, your brainstorming, all of those things. Like even right now, this podcast that we're doing, like this is costing us money essentially. Um, These all the time spent costs business money, right? And to support the tier three tiered system, which wasn't even performing very well in sales, it just became an overwhelming. Like, why would we do this? Like, we were wrong, for with our assumptions. Well, I don't say wrong because it was a test in the first place, right? Pricing is always a moving target. It's something that you iterate on. So I don't know if necessarily wrong is the right word, but it wasn't something that was working. So we iterated, and so far, this pricing system has been significantly more promising. It seems to be working a lot better. And the response from new people is that it's much more clear, right? We have gotten those
Yeah,
emails too.
we don't get emails being like, "What's
Oh,
the
what's it?
difference
Yeah.
between
In
this
fact,
and
okay,
this
let me say this. We have gotten more emails from students and more response from students saying that the pricing is more clear and makes more sense now than we have gotten people saying, why doesn't the light plan exist? Right, that's the minority of people versus the number. So not only is the pricing performing better, but even the response is better, essentially. But yeah, there was too much confusion before. Which plan do I get? Like, oh man, it was rough. So that is why the light plan doesn't exist. Got to make a sustainable business. Otherwise, we can't do what we want to do here, and we won't all be able to learn Japanese and other
all the
languages so
things."
easily. Yeah. Any other
Yeah. Also, we just
business?
want to. There's so much content that we want to put out, and like even not talking about expanding to other languages.
Yeah, even just in
If we're gonna get
Japanese.
all the content we want in Japanese done quickly, we need more employees. But to do that, we need to have the right pricing in place so that even before we have any other languages, the business is profitable with the number of employees needed to make that possible.
Right. Tyler
So that's
says it makes sense to combine the features and change and charge a fair market price. Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
For sure. Um, yeah, we did a lot more when we were working on like the what do you call it, the rebuild or like the restructuring of the pricing. Um, we did because okay, the original pricing decision that came out in August, that decision was more or less made, I don't know, months ago, like in May or earlier. And then around August, around when we were launching, is when we were thinking about, okay, this might not be working that great. We probably need to change this. How are we going to change it? But it was already too late to get those changes in for the launch, so we had to launch with what we did have. Because at that stage, like July, August, we were still researching, doing market research, things of that nature, about the new pricing change, which happened in October. So again, with business, it's like things happen, 4 months in advance or 4 months delayed, depending on how you want to look at it. Everything's always a bit lagging. So, any other business things we want to talk about today?
I'm
What else do we have going on?
not sure.
Working on getting some ads running again. That'd be nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, because we
we
got to work
need.
on that exposure, right? Now that we have a good pricing structure that's sustainable, and now we got to get back to getting more exposure.
Yeah, if I'll answer your question in a second, Cinder. But about the ads, another reason we changed the pricing, and you'll notice if you look at the new pricing, is that it highly incentivizes getting annual over monthly. And a big reason for that is because we need to be able to run profitable ads. And when your monthly plans are incentivized over your annual ones or equally, a lot of people end up getting monthly, which means that if you ran an ad to get that person, you might not make enough money back from the money it costed you to get that new student for 4, 5, 6 months,
Right.
which means that you need to be able to sustain ad spend for 4, 5, 6 months before you get the money back to keep running the ads. So that means if you wanted to spend like $5,000 a month running ads, you actually have to have like $30,000. So you can run them for 6 months before they start becoming profitable.
Right before the
But if you
recuperation.
incentivize annual, it's possible that you get the money back from the ads that you ran within 30 days or less. So it would allow us to scale more quickly, essentially. Because if we get the money back from a new student quickly, then we have enough money to run more ads, which means we have enough money to hire new people, which means we have enough money to increase the content and do all the things that we want to do, build the new tools and such.
Yep.
That also.
Um, any updates on the affiliate program? So we're working on a referral program. Those are for students. So if you're a student of NativShark and you want to refer it to friends with like a link and have some sort of, we haven't actually figured out exactly what the incentive is, like how we're gonna do that exactly. If you have ideas, feel free to share. But yeah, we're working on the referral system. So if you're a student, you'll have a referral link, and then we're also working on alternatively, no, at the same time, I can't think of the word. Um, is a partner
Concurrently,
concurrently? Yeah, there
perhaps.
we go. A partner program, and that one is for creators, like content creators and stuff like that. So if you're a content creator with an audience of a given size, and you know you want to be sponsored by NativShark, things like that, or we maybe will approach some people approach us, we approach others, that kind of a thing, as a partner program. Or if you are a content creator and you want to create content about the NativShark platform, um, that one we're also working on at the same time. So we'll have two programs. One of them is a referral program for students, and the other one is a partner program for content creators. And hopefully December is when they'll be ready. I think I was talking about with the development team this morning, but I think December, so soon. Maybe before that, but probably December. Um, so other question is: the reworking of phase one coming before or after the rest of the phases are released? Nico question there. I could answer it, but
It's a loaded question.
yeah,
So yes and no.
yeah. I was gonna say yes and no is
so
the answer.
So getting out more phase two, three, four content is a higher priority than reworking phase one content. However, we will probably have the rework of phase one released sometime around when we are releasing other language directions and when we have to have the CMP set up properly. We mentioned this in our last episode that a CMP is a content management platform, by the way. It's what we use to create content that the student sees. We mentioned this somewhat in the last episode of this podcast that with the new CMP, it'll be possible to track what a student knows quite well. We'll know every word they've learned, every kanji, everything, so that if we change something in phase one they've already gone past, we'll be able to only tell them to see things, to look at things that they didn't know based on their old studies. So all that stuff needs to be built before we even worry about releasing new phase one stuff. That said, we do have some plans for phase one. A lot of it is already a rework is already planned to a great extent, but you'll probably see more phase two and so on and three and four content getting released before you see that happen.
Yeah, which is essentially due to development and technical limitations at the moment. Team size.
Yeah.
We can't work on two things concurrently.
Yeah, we're not going to release, a reworking of phase one if the technology is not there for us to say, but don't worry, you only have to look at these things to see
Yeah.
what you missed
For
in
anyone
the
who's
new version.
already gone through phase one,
It's
like if we released it
yeah,
now, well, there'll be way too many questions and people will be way too worried, and it just wouldn't be a fun experience
yeah,
as a student to be like, wait, do I need to go back and redo this because it's different now? And you don't, but there might be a couple things in there, and since we don't have the technology in place yet, we're not going to release it. Even though there has been work towards the rework put in place already, we're kind of not releasing it until that's done.
yeah.
So, like Nico said,
Our
phase
our
two.
our content team is, like going hard on phase two stuff right now and building out our
Yeah,
dictionary as well.
right. So for content focus at the moment, working within the technology that we have right now, we're working on getting content for phase two and beyond coming out faster than a new student could ever catch up with, essentially on the 2 year plan. I guess that's the goal. It'll take a bit. Probably take a couple months actually, if we're honest, to hit that rate. Um, but that's what we're working on. That's where content effort is going. And then development effort right now, because our team is very small at the moment, we're working on the stability of the site. As you guys have noticed, when our last patch came out, it introduced a bit of instability to a couple of the core systems, which is unfortunate. So we are now working on just, we got the whole site working more performant, so it's faster now, but then it introduced some instability. So now we're working on the stability and then also making it so that future patches don't introduce as much instability as this one did. Um, so that's what's in play there. And then in addition to that, just the overall core experience, we're working on rounding out essentially, because it's not like what you see there is not the full core experience. So we can't even start working on the fun, cool tools about typing in onyami kunyami and stuff for kanji, because the core experience isn't in a state yet where we want it to be before we start working on extra fun stuff like that. But it's really exciting. Like the stuff that's going to come out is going to because like already like right now the platform is like, okay, it's cool, it works well. I can learn Japanese from it. But when the core experience is finished, you don't even know. I'm excited. I was talking this morning with the development team about what we're doing.
Yeah, I'm very excited about what the content team is doing right now.
Hmm.
You consider that the only full-time employees are Ray and myself, so it's just the two of us, but we have a lot of collaborators that we use to produce various pieces of the content, and we've developed a pretty sweet placeholder system until our CMP is finished that is going to allow us to release lots of delicious Japanese content in the not so distant future, and I'm very excited to get it released and in students' hands and
really
to study it actually myself, because there's a lot of stuff that I personally want to study as well.
Dude, the day that's coming soon when we have Japanese content coming out every week at a fast rate, dude, that's a good day.
Yeah.
It's coming soon.
Coming soon to a device near you.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. I think we went through all of our questions.
We did.
Let me check Twitter. Actually, I don't think I even tweeted that. I forgot to tweet, honestly. I was going to.
How dare thee?
I was gonna say you can ask questions on Twitter as well. Let me just check. Make sure I didn't get any questions. Nope, not today. I'll have to remember to do that next week. Take questions from Twitter too. The holidays are coming soon, Niko.
Yeah. I hadn't thought much about it.
I hadn't either until I went to Twitter and I just saw the city of Fukuoka tweeted about their every Christmas they have this huge festival that's like 2 months long, I think, at Hakata Eki and down in Tenji. It's like the Christmas festival.
Oh yeah.
In Hakata Eki, I'll take a picture later when it's put up, but they build this like 40-foot Christmas tree in the center of the plaza, and then there's every night they set up these booths, these food stalls from foods from around the world, and it's like a Christmas fairs, I think what they call it. It's really nice, and there's music every night, and then they have like live opera come a couple nights a week. It's actually super cool.
They have what is it? Illumination.
Illumination, yes.
Illumination, like illumination, is like I don't. It's not wasei. Like it's kind of waseigo.
That's
I
all
guess.
the like
So
the
it's
lights and stuff, right? Like the
yeah. It's basically Christmas lights, but they call it illumination, which is just the word illumination in
yeah.
katakana, and it's a big deal in a lot of places. They have, and it's pretty amazing actually in various areas of the country, where you can basically walk in a sea of lights.
Yes.
It's very romantic.
They do have that. Yes, they do.
I'm sure they do somewhere around
Yeah,
you.
for sure. There's a couple places. There's a garden that they do it in the Christmas. That's really really fun. It's like the hanging some kind of hanging gardens. There's like all these trees. It's like if you look up like Fukuoka Prefecture flowers, you'll find it. It's like one of those really famous ones where there's like the tunnel of flower trees. Anyway, in wintertime they make that all full of lights. Something
Yeah,
like that.
we got a Christmas tree, and it's just a little guy.
A
And
nice little cute one.
my infant son loves to mess with it.
Of course.
He's knocked it over once already.
Of course. Um yes, Josh, I see that you say that you had no idea this was on. We need to get better about tweeting and just like the information about the fact that we're doing this podcast weekly. Gotta do that.
Yeah,
We'll get on it.
I kind of like just showing up, and if you were lucky enough, you got to see it. But I know that we're not supposed to do it that way.
Yeah, man, we gotta grow a podcast, dude.
Yeah,
But
it
look,
appeals to my way of doing things, though, just
it
showing up and doing it.
it does. We have to well, we're posting the VODs on YouTube, so you guys can see it on YouTube.
Yeah, Tyler, my son is also 1.5, so our kids would be best friends.
Around the same age.
Yeah,
If you know, you know, you know. Yeah, that's right. For sure. Oh, on unrelated note, can you play the harp, Nico? No, that's today's harp.
no, let's raise. I don't know how to play instruments at all,
Yeah.
but Ray just started learning it recently, and she would probably get mad at me if I said this, but she's already pretty good at it, probably because she's so good at piano already. So it's nice to listen to sometimes. She doesn't play it very often because usually she's sitting next to me on her computer doing stuff for content, but every now and then she steals away for like 15 minutes or so, and it's
Hmm.
some nice background music for my work.
Yeah.
It's pretty light. You can like wheel it around. It doesn't weigh that much. I thought it was gonna weigh a ton, but it doesn't.
It's hollow because it's got to
Yeah.
reverberate.
Yeah. Well, we're renting this also. There it is. Yeah. Someday
Hmm.
we'll buy our own, but not until NativShark is making lots of money and I have my own house and not a tiny little apartment where
Yeah, man, it's the
we
life.
rent a
It's
harp.
that startup life.
Yeah, if we had
Gotta
lots of
make it
money, we
work.
would spend it to get more employees to improve. That is what we spend all of our
That
money
is
on
what we spent
anyway.
all of our money on.
Yeah, more employees, more NativShark.
Yep.
Oh, thank you, Cinder. I agree. It's really
It is a nice
a
background
beautiful
piece.
instrument.
Yeah. I just have like this other computer as my background piece. I
Fancy.
don't have a cool harp. Harp is fun to play though. I played it a bit in high school, but not a lot. I played piano a lot more. Piano, guitar, bass guitar, vocals. But harp is pretty. Hmm. Well,
Yeah, I think that's it.
yeah, does anyone else have any more questions for Nico or myself? Now's your chance. What to think about next week?
I'm sure we'll have lots of ideas between now and next week. Lots of things
For
to
sure.
be discussing.
All right. Um, I suppose we'll end stream right here. We'll call it.
Yeah, thank you all for joining.
Yes.
It's
Thank
nice to
you.
interact with
It
my
is.
fellow students.
It's fun. Okay, so next week, we'll put a little more effort into letting people know that it's gonna happen. That it'll be at a certain time. Great to hear your thoughts on why we do what we do, for sure. All right, take care. Thanks everyone. Thanks for coming out to stream. Thanks for the couple follows we got. Yeah, we'll see you next week. We'll
Yeah,
be
thank
here
you.
around 8 a.m. JST. So I think we got here at 8:30 today, but somewhere around 8 a.m. Yep. All right. I'm gonna end stream.
By 8:30, surely we will be
Yes,
streaming
by
at that.
8:30 for sure. All right. Take care. Shark Wave
All right,
is
see
in
you
the
guys.
chat.
Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.